I never proposed to her, but the day Loveth gently held my hand, looked into my eyes without looking away, and welcomed my first kiss instead of resisting it, I knew she had fallen deeply in love with me. But if I already knew she loved me, why had I spent nearly 2 years too afraid to ask her to be mine? My name is Benedict, and Loveth was everything I believed I could never have. Beautiful, brilliant, kind, and admired by everyone who knew her. I loved her in silence because I was convinced a woman like her would never choose an ordinary man like me. Then she started changing. She remembered the smallest things I said. She worried whenever I disappeared. She always found a reason to be close to me, and without saying, "I love you," she began loving me in ways that words never could. But what really happened the day our paths first crossed? Why was I so terrified of proposing to the woman I loved? And what were those quiet little things Loveth did that made me realize her heart had already chosen me long before I found the courage to choose her? If anyone had told me that the most important day of my life would begin like every other Saturday morning, I would have laughed and walked away. At exactly 8 o'clock, I steered my dark blue Toyota Prado through the busy streets toward St. Matthew Community Library, a building my engineering company had agreed to inspect free of charge after part of its roof collapsed during a violent windstorm 3 days earlier. People often assumed that, because I owned one of the fastest-growing structural engineering firms in the state, I had always lived comfortably. They saw the expensive watch on my wrist, the well-tailored suits, the company vehicles carrying my logo across town, and the respect I received whenever I stepped onto a construction site. What they never saw were the invisible scars beneath that success. There was a time when my mother sold roasted corn by the roadside just to keep food on our table after my father died unexpectedly. I still remembered sitting beside her after school, using old cement bags as notebooks because we couldn't afford exercise books. Those memories never left me. They became the reason I promised myself that once I succeeded, I would never refuse to help rebuild schools, churches, or community centers that ordinary people depended on. That promise was exactly why I was driving toward the damaged library instead of attending a meeting that could have earned my company millions. As Benedict Construction approached the neighborhood, my phone rang through the car speakers. "Clement calling." I smiled before answering. "My hardworking cousin," Clement teased immediately. "Don't tell me you're spending another Saturday fixing buildings for free." I chuckled. "Somebody has to. You'll never change, Ben." "I hope I don't." "You know," Clement continued, "one day you're going to meet a woman who'll complain that you love broken buildings more than you love her." I laughed softly. "First, I have to meet the woman." There was a brief silence before Clement replied in a tone that carried more meaning than humor. "No, Ben. First you have to stop believing you're unworthy of one." The words lingered long after the call ended. Unknown to Clement, they had touched a wound I rarely allowed anyone to see. For years, I had quietly convinced myself that successful women belonged beside men who were more charismatic, more confident, and more extraordinary than I believed I was. Outwardly, I appeared accomplished. Inwardly, a part of me still saw the poor boy who once counted coins before buying bread. That hidden insecurity had followed me into every area of my life, especially love. Little did I know that before the morning ended, fate was already arranging a meeting that would challenge every belief I had ever held about myself. A few kilometers ahead, a loud horn shattered the calm. People began screaming. An overloaded commercial bus swerved violently across the road. A small red football bounced into the middle of the street. Then a little boy ran after it. And in that single heartbeat, 2 strangers, who had never spoken, never met, and never imagined they were about to change each other's lives forever, started running toward the same child from opposite sides of the road. The little boy never saw the speeding bus. His eyes were fixed on the red football rolling across the road while terrified voices erupted from every direction. "Daniel, stop!" a woman screamed, dropping the grocery bag in her hands. Without thinking, I slammed my car door shut and sprinted toward him. From the opposite side of the road, A young woman in a white blouse and navy skirt rushed forward just as fearlessly. Her long hair danced behind her, but she never slowed down. We reached the child at the same moment. I grabbed the boy around his waist while she pulled his tiny arm toward her. The bus thundered past us, missing us by only a few inches before crashing into a roadside electric pole. The street fell silent. Then applause erupted. The little boy burst into tears and buried his face against the young woman's shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered, gently rubbing his back. "You're safe now." Only then did I notice her properly. She was breathtakingly beautiful, yet there was nothing proud about her. Calm replaced panic on her face, as though protecting people was second nature. Before I could speak, sharp pain shot through my left hand. A jagged piece of concrete from the roadside drain had sliced my palm while I was pulling the boy away. "Oh my goodness," she said, stepping closer. "You're bleeding." "It's just a scratch." She looked directly into my eyes. "No, it's deeper than you think." There was quiet confidence in her voice, not panic, not hesitation. A nearby shopkeeper hurried over. "Dr. Loveth, the clinic is open. Please bring him inside." "Doctor," the word surprised me. She turned back to me with a gentle smile. "I'm Loveth." "I'm Benedict." Neither of us knew it then, but years later, I would look back on that simple introduction and realize fate had quietly written the first line of our love story the moment our hands reached for the same child. Loveth led me into the small community clinic, just a few steps from the accident scene. Though the building was modest, it was spotless, and every patient who walked through its doors greeted her with genuine affection. "Dr. Loveth, good morning," an elderly woman called with a smile. "How's your knee today, Mama Grace?" she asked warmly before turning back to me. "Please have a seat." I sat on the examination bed while she carefully cleaned the blood from my hand. I winced. "I told you it was only a scratch," I joked. Without looking up, she smiled. "And I told you engineers shouldn't diagnose injuries." I laughed quietly. As she stitched the cut with remarkable precision, I couldn't help but notice how gentle her hands were. She wasn't rushing to finish. She treated me with the same patience she had shown the frightened little boy. "You saved that child's life today," she said. We both did. She finally looked up. "Guess we make a good team." Simple words lingered in my mind longer than they should have. Outside the clinic, volunteers were already gathering near the damaged community library. I explained that my company had offered to inspect and restore the building free of charge. Her eyes lit up. "Been organizing free reading sessions there every Saturday for children who can't afford private lessons. If the library closes for long, they'll have nowhere to study." That was the first time I saw how deeply she cared about people she'd never met before. "Make sure it opens again," I promised. She extended her hand with a grateful smile. "Then my children already owe you a thank you." As our hands met, neither of us realized another promise had silently been made. The rebuilt library would bring us together every Saturday, and each meeting would slowly build something neither of us expected. The following Saturday arrived faster than I expected. By 7:30 that morning, trucks carrying cement, timber, and roofing sheets had already pulled into the library compound. My workers immediately got to work, measuring cracked walls and marking unsafe sections with bright orange tape. As I reviewed the structural drawings, a familiar voice interrupted my concentration. "Good morning, Engineer Benedict." I turned and saw Loveth walking through the gate with 6 young medical volunteers carrying first aid boxes, drinking water, and packed meals. "I thought you were only running a clinic," I said with a smile. "I do," she replied. "But construction sites and stubborn engineers usually need first aid." Workers laughed. "You planned this?" I asked. She shrugged playfully. "Someone has to make sure nobody faints before lunchtime." That simple act revealed something important about her character. Loveth never waited to be invited before helping where she was needed. It wasn't something she switched on for special occasions. It had become part of who she was. Years earlier, after losing her father to a preventable medical emergency in a village with no nearby health care, she had promised herself that wherever people gathered, compassion should be present too. That quiet promise explained why she spent nearly every weekend serving strangers instead of resting. As the day unfolded, I found myself watching her more than the building. She comforted frightened children who thought the library would disappear forever. She bandaged a carpenter's bruised thumb. She even sat beside an elderly widow who simply wanted someone to listen. Watching her stirred something I quickly buried. A woman like Loveth belonged in a world far above mine, I reminded myself. Yet fate seemed determined to keep placing us side by side. That afternoon, one little girl tugged gently on Loveth's sleeve. "Dr. Loveth," she whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "are you and Uncle Benedict building this library together? Or something else?" Loveth froze for a heartbeat, then smiled without answering. I laughed it off. But for reasons I couldn't explain, neither of us forgot the child's innocent question. The library gradually became more than a construction site. Every Saturday, it felt like a small family gathering. The children arrived early with their notebooks. Volunteers swept the compound before work began. The sound of hammers blended with children's laughter, creating a rhythm that somehow made even the hardest work feel lighter. Without realizing it, Loveth and I developed our own routine. She would arrive carrying a flask of tea and greet every worker by name. "Good morning, Mr. Musa. How is your daughter now, Mr. Peter?" Even my laborers were amazed that she remembered details most people forgot. One afternoon, as we sat beneath a mango tree reviewing the renovation budget, I casually reached for a bottle of chilled water from a cooler. Before I could open it, Loveth gently took it from my hand. "You shouldn't drink this." I looked at her, confused. She smiled and handed me another bottle. "This one isn't cold." I frowned. "How did you know I don't like cold water?" "You mentioned it." "I don't remember." "You said it the day I treated your hand." Her answer seemed effortless, but it lingered in my mind long after she walked away. That evening, I found myself replaying our first meeting. I could barely remember what I had eaten that day, yet she remembered one casual sentence I had spoken weeks earlier. Clement noticed my unusual silence when we met for dinner. "You've been smiling at your phone all evening," he teased. "I'm not." "You are." He leaned forward with a grin. "Is it Dr. Loveth?" I almost choked on my drink. "We're just friends." Clement laughed. "Keep telling yourself that." I forced a smile, but inside, I quickly shut the door my heart had started opening. Friendship was safe. Love wasn't. Still unknown to me, Loveth had already begun paying attention to the smallest pieces of my life, pieces no ordinary friend would quietly collect. And that tiny detail was only the beginning. Weeks turned into months, and the library slowly transformed from a broken building into a place filled with hope. The walls were freshly painted, new bookshelves had arrived, and every Saturday brought more volunteers than the week before. Although I rarely admitted it, I had started looking forward to those Saturdays for only one reason: Loveth. One afternoon, after everyone had gone home, I remained behind to inspect the newly installed roof. By the time I finished, the sun had already disappeared. As I reached my car, my phone vibrated. "Loveth, have you left the library yet?" I smiled before replying, "Me, just finished." Why, less than a minute later, another message appeared. "Loveth, please don't skip dinner again. You worked through lunch today." I stared at the screen. I had told no one I missed lunch, not even Clement. Curious, I called her. "How did you know?" She laughed softly. "You looked tired this afternoon." "That's all." "No," she admitted. "You also become unusually quiet when you're hungry." Her answer caught me completely off guard. How had she noticed something I didn't even notice about myself? As I drove home, memories of the past few months replayed in my mind. She always asked if I arrived safely after long journeys. She reminded me about meetings I had casually mentioned weeks earlier. She remembered my mother's birthday and even sent flowers before I did. Each act seemed ordinary on its own, but together they formed a pattern I couldn't explain. Meanwhile, Loveth was fighting a quiet battle within herself. She often caught herself smiling whenever Benedict's name appeared on her phone, then quickly hid that smile from her mother, Veronica. But Veronica noticed anyway. A mother recognizes the language of love long before her daughter does. She said nothing, choosing instead to watch patiently, knowing some hearts bloom only when they feel safe. I still called it friendship, but destiny had already begun calling it something else. The library officially reopened 3 months later, and the entire community celebrated as though they had regained a piece of their future. Children raced through the aisles, proudly choosing books, while parents thanked every volunteer who had helped make the restoration possible. Standing at the back of the hall, I watched Loveth kneel beside a little girl. helping her write her name inside the cover of a brand new storybook. "Given them more than books," I said as I walked over. "You've given them hope." She looked up and smiled. We all did. Celebration continued late into the afternoon, but something happened that quietly unsettled my heart. A well-dressed man stepped out of a black luxury SUV and walked confidently toward Loveth. He was tall, handsome, and carried himself like someone accustomed to admiration. "Loveth," he called warmly. She turned, surprised. "David, I didn't know you were back." They exchanged a friendly hug. For reasons I couldn't explain, my smile disappeared. I excused myself and pretended to inspect the parking area, but my eyes kept drifting back toward them. Clement noticed immediately. "Jealous?" "I'm not." "Then why have you looked at the same wall 5 times in 2 minutes?" I sighed. "It's probably more suitable for her." Clement folded his arms. "Ben, do you know what your biggest problem is?" I remained silent. "Already decided you'll lose her, without ever giving her the chance to choose." His words struck deeper than he realized. Meanwhile, Loveth ended her conversation with David after only a few minutes. He had been an old university classmate passing through town, nothing more. She searched the crowd, her eyes moving from one volunteer to another until they finally found me. "There you are," she said, walking over. "I've been looking for you." She didn't know it, but that simple sentence planted another seed in my heart. Out of everyone gathered that day, I was the person she had been searching for. Life gradually settled into a comfortable rhythm after the library project ended, but something unexpected happened. The project was over. Our friendship wasn't. Instead of drifting apart, Loveth found new reasons for us to meet. Sometimes she would call to ask for advice about repairing a leaking classroom roof at her school. Other times, she insisted I join her and Veronica for Sunday lunch because, as she always put it, Mum cooked too much food again. Invitations became so frequent that even Veronica began smiling whenever I walked through their front door. "You don't need permission anymore, Benedict," she joked one afternoon. "This house already knows your footsteps." Loveth immediately lowered her eyes, pretending to arrange the dining table. After lunch, Veronica quietly disappeared into the kitchen, leaving the two of us alone on the veranda. The silence between us was never awkward. It had become peaceful. A cool breeze swept across the compound as Loveth gently brushed a dry leaf from my shoulder. "You always forget to look after yourself," she murmured. I smiled. "And you always notice." She looked away, hiding the smile growing on her face. Unknown to me, this wasn't something she did with anyone else. Weeks earlier, one of her colleagues had jokingly asked why she always talked about engineer Benedict. Loveth had denied everything, but later that night, she caught herself smiling while reading our old text messages. It frightened her how naturally my happiness had become part of hers. As we prepared to leave, Veronica called from the doorway. "Loveth, don't forget Benedict's favorite chin-chin." I stared at both of them. "My favorite?" Veronica laughed. "Someone spent 2 weekends learning how to make it exactly the way your mother does." Loveth blushed. I just wanted to get it right." The first time, my heart whispered a question my mind was still too afraid to answer. Could a woman really do all these little things without being deeply in love? For the next several days, I couldn't stop thinking about Veronica's words. Someone spent 2 weekends learning how to make it exactly the way your mother does. It wasn't the chin-chin that stayed with me. It was the effort behind it. Nobody invests that kind of time just to be polite. Yet every time hope tried to rise inside me, fear quickly pushed it back down. What if I was reading too much into her kindness? What if I confessed my feelings and discovered that everything I believed was love was simply the way Loveth treated everyone? That question haunted me. A week later, Clement invited both of us to his younger sister's engagement ceremony. The atmosphere was lively, filled with laughter, music, and dancing. Families congratulated the couple while photographers moved from table to table, capturing happy moments. Loveth looked stunning in a simple emerald green dress that drew admiring glances wherever she walked. Several young men tried starting conversations with her, but she politely excused herself each time and somehow ended up standing beside me again. Clement watched us from across the hall and quietly smiled. As the photographer approached, he laughed and said, "Benedict, Loveth, stand together. You two look more like the couple than the bride and groom." Everyone around us laughed. I felt embarrassed and instinctively stepped back. Before I could move away completely, Loveth gently reached for my hand. She didn't seem to realize what she had done until our fingers were already intertwined. Instead of letting go, she simply smiled. The photographer captured the moment. A few guests exchanged knowing glances. Veronica, standing nearby, noticed the way Loveth looked at me after the camera flash faded. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't friendship. It was the quiet look of a woman who had already given someone a place in her heart. As we walked toward the parking lot later that evening, Loveth slipped her hand into mine again. This time, she didn't even realize she had done it. But I did. And for the first time, I began to believe the impossible. That night, neither of us was in a hurry to leave. The engagement hall had almost emptied, leaving only a few workers arranging chairs and sweeping the floor. Outside, the cool evening breeze carried the faint sound of music from a nearby street. Loveth and I walked slowly toward my car, our hands brushing against each other until our fingers naturally locked together. This time, she didn't pull away. Neither did IWE. Stood beside the car in comfortable silence. I turned to look at her. "Loveth," she lifted her eyes. "Has been something I've wanted to tell you for a long time," she smiled softly. "I know." Those two words caught me completely off guard. "You know," she nodded. "Known for months." My heart pounded. "Then why didn't you say anything?" "Because," she replied gently, "love isn't something I wanted to force out of you. I wanted you to be ready." In that moment, every memory rushed back. The room temperature water, the late-night messages asking if I had eaten, the way she always searched for me in a crowd, learning my favorite snacks from my mother, remembering tiny details I had forgotten, and holding my hand without even realizing she had done it. The answers had been in front of me all along. I slowly raised my hand and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't move. Instead, she stepped closer. I leaned in and kissed her gently. She closed her eyes, kissed me back without hesitation, and rested her forehead against mine. "I was beginning to think you'd never do that," she whispered with a quiet laugh. I smiled through tears. "I never proposed to you." She squeezed my hand. "I know, because I was afraid you deserved someone better." Loveth shook her head. "No, Benedict." She looked straight into my eyes. "I never needed the proposal to know you loved me, just as you never needed my words to know I had already fallen deeply in love with you." As we embraced beneath the night sky, I finally understood the greatest lesson love had ever taught me. Sometimes, the loudest confession isn't spoken. It's quietly lived through countless little acts of love.